It took only 3 days for the phoenix to rise out of the ashes, but for Japanese Canadians, it took decades to leave behind the ashes of almost total annihilation. For 4 years, a small group who had formed the National Association of Japanese Canadians, under the leadership of Art Miki, had been negotiating with Prime Minister Brian Mulroney for a redress agreement for the wrongs that the Canadian government had committed against Japanese Canadians during World War II. On September the 22nd, 1988, after running into roadblock after roadblock, we began to rise out of the ashes. That was the day that Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and NAJC President Art Miki signed the redress agreement in Ottawa. An excerpt from the document secures the future of all Canadian citizens. 1. An acknowledgement that the treatment of Japanese Canadians before and after World War II was unjust and a violation of human rights. 2. A pledge to ensure that the government, to its full power, will prevent events such as these from occurring again. In her book, Bittersweet Passage, Redress, and the Japanese Canadian Experience, Marika Omatsu, a member of that small group, who later became the first judge of Asian heritage in Canada, presents a moving account of the Japanese Canadian struggle to come to terms with a painful history. It is also the story of her own journey to understand and reclaim the silenced voices of her community. She tells how the Japanese Canadian community finally won redress and was resurrected through a struggle that won civil rights protection for all Canadians. She expressed through personal detail the events of September the 22nd, 1988. Here is what she recollects after the formal signing, which was over in a flash. Incredibly, with a single stroke of the pen, the Prime Minister had imperiously returned honor and dignity to an entire community. Afterwards, Mulroney got up and came and shook hands with each one of us. I finally got to meet the man in my dreams, face to face, to see him at close range. I'd have something to tell my mother, who was always asking me, "What's he like?" Mostly, I remember noticing his pale, beautiful, long curly eyelashes. He had nothing in particular to say except, "Congratulations on a job well done." Given the intensity of the moment, I'm not sure how coherent any of us would have been if he had tried to engage us in more than small talk. Then, as quickly as he had come, he left. Omatsu reflects in silence after the rush of events. That evening, and on the following day, the settlement dominated the front pages of the daily newspapers and the news broadcasts. Across the country, in throng-filled halls and around kitchen tables, Japanese Canadians celebrated the return of their dignity. The community has regained its honor at last. Going home that night, in the quiet darkness of the car, with 3 of us pressed together in the back seat, I thought of my mother, my brother, my sister, all in Hamilton. They would have heard the news, and I wished I was there with them. It was a time to be near those we loved, the people who had gone through the pain for years and who still daily bore the scars. Like the phoenix, the Japanese Canadians began to rise out of the ashes of their devastated community. But the trauma of the forced removal remains intergenerational, most notably in the sansei, the third-generation Japanese Canadians. Also, my generation. Omatsu speaks of her own journey as a young girl. Today, in a country filled with immigrants, refugees, and exiles, it is acceptable to search for your roots and to acknowledge those dual loyalties. But for most of Canada's history, for those of us from non-Anglo-Saxon heritages, the cost extracted for Canadian citizenship was with slash-and-burn surgery and unconditional submersion. For my generation, assimilation demanded a denial of our ethnicity. And the aching pain remained. Uncomfortable within our own skins, we secretively tried to reconcile our reflections in the mirror with the reality that lay just beyond the front door. Our parents, the Nikkei, were willing to pay this price, and they strove even harder to become 150% Canadian. They hoped in doing so to gain acceptance, to win the franchise, and finally, to receive equal citizenship rights with whites. Of all our generations in Canada, the Nikkei had best learned the lesson. Yet, even though knowing the Nikkei's deeply held convictions of honor, family, and duty, as a young girl, I saw their refusal to fight for what was theirs as being distinctly un-North American. As the years passed, the Japanese Canadian survivors of the camp had tried to put the past behind them and slowly bury the trauma of the warriors under successive layers of scar tissue. And so, my parents, like all of the other Nikkei, never spoke of what had happened in the past. They accepted what had happened as something which was inevitable. Shikata ga nai. It can't be helped. When I first went to school in Ontario, there were no Asian or Black children in the whole school. The children were all very kind to me and accepted me as one of them. But I felt different, an outsider. I wanted to look like mainstream Anglo children. I was ashamed of being Japanese. I decided, at age 6, to stop speaking Japanese, my first language. It must have hurt my parents very much. The Japanese are a shame culture. Everything an individual does reflects on the whole community. Because of the forced relocation of Japanese Canadians during the war, they felt that if they behaved as perfect Canadians, they would once again be accepted as members of Canadian society. I am a sansei, a third-generation Japanese Canadian. Still, I always felt that I had to earn my citizenship. My father wanted me to be perfect in every way, especially at school. I became obsessed with being the best. This work is reminiscent of a wanted poster. Wanted, model enemy alien. Not a single act of rebellion was perpetrated during World War II by Japanese Canadians. Wanted, model minority. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Never criticize the government for what they did. Wanted, model assimilation. As a result of the trauma, there is no visible Japanese Canadian community today. We lost our culture and our ethnic identity. Wanted, model citizen. All Japanese Canadians are law-abiding. It has taken me 74 years after World War II, 32 years after the government's acknowledgement and apology, to come to terms with who I am, a Canadian of Japanese heritage. Having my art in the Royal Ontario Museum's iconic exhibition, Being Japanese Canadian, Reflections on a Broken World, in 2019 was a turning point in my life. By interspersing the artwork of 8 Japanese-Canadian artists in the Sigmund Samuel Gallery of Canadian History, I finally felt that our story is an important part of the history of Canada. My portrait of my mother in city clothes behind a barbed wire fence in Alberta was the signature image for the exhibition. For me, the phoenix has finally risen out of the ashes to light the dark night once more with its blazing glory of red and gold.